Good morning, All Saints. It is Monday morning, the 28th of March. I'm a little late this morning. We're having the Mondayest of all Monday mornings around here today, but all is well, just, household things. It's good to be with you this morning. Those of you who are local know that I was away on a retreat this weekend, which was lovely, and I have more to say about that in a moment. But I do hope that wherever you were over this weekend, that you spent some time in prayer and in worship with your community. The retreat for this weekend was called Womanist Midrash, and that's actually the title of a book by the Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney. She's a professor of Hebrew Bible at Bright Divinity School, and we use her lectionary. We're using her current lectionary for year W, which is for any year. If we use the current lectionary year, we'd be in year C. We opted at the beginning of Advent to use this, which does not follow, except at major feast, it doesn't follow the traditional customary lectionary text. But most importantly, the translations are Dr. Gaffney's, both the Hebrew, the Aramaic, the Greek, and some of the translation choices. If you're familiar with the Bible, they don't sit easily on the ear. And she has a lot of explanatory notes in the preface to the book. And also, we talked about this over the weekend, which is one of the reasons I wanted to attend this retreat, to talk about these textual choices and translational choices that she made. And as she makes very clear, and as I know from the biblical studies I have done, all scripture reading is interpretation. Everything from how it's written down to how I preach it is about interpretation. And so she has remained faithful to interpreting the text, except in those areas that have customarily been designed, for instance, to include women and children. So, if, for just as a for instance, if a text says the people of Israel, she might translate people as women, children, and men to make sure that we understand that we're talking about the breadth of the people. And because so often when one gender is identified, it's the men of Israel. So she makes that sort of thing explicit. And while that might not be what the text actually literally says, it's implied. And so she's making explicit in some cases what is implied. Now, her book, Womanist Midrash, which I do have, it's in the other room, is taking the women of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and expanding their stories a bit, because so often we either don't know their names, we don't know anything about them beyond their childbearing capacity normally. And so because she is trained in and has worshiped in a synagogue and is a member of a Reconstructionist synagogue, and she can read these texts in their original languages, she has the authority to actually do midrash, which is to read between the lines and to come up with stories about the text, just as the rabbis did throughout the ages in midrash. So she's a great storyteller and an imaginer, and amplifying the stories of women, which is what this lectionary tries to do. And one of the ways she does that is in the ways that she names God. And if you hear the Psalms that we use in our services, you will know that where we often might read Father or He or God or Lord, there's a lot of Lord in there. She tends to avoid those words because they are strictly male. And the name for God, those 4 letters, which I'm using in the image for this reflection, those 4 Hebrew letters, they represent the name of the unpronounceable name of God. It is not to be said, not only because we don't really know how it was said, but also because it is a holy name and is not to be said. And so that we have tried in some instances to insert some vowels to make it into a name, Yahweh, or Jehovah. Those really are kind of usurping the sacredness of that name from our Jewish kin. And so Dr. Gaffney says that's to be avoided. And so, what are we to do? Well, the word Lord, which she does not use except when it's referring to a specific, perhaps, master of someone else, she avoids that because Lord implies it is a male word. It implies owning something or having someone under your authority, a servant or a slave. And so she avoids the word Lord where she can. Father is obviously a gendered language. And king also is gendered language. Master implies the master of someone who is enslaved. So for king, she often uses sovereign. Now we know that sovereign refers to a male or female ruler. And so whenever you see the word king, she will often insert the word sovereign. Now it may feel awkward, and it just does to me as I read through things. They don't trip off my tongue the way the more familiar language, but it causes me to pause and think of the many ways that I have internalized the maleness of the Almighty when in fact God has no gender at all. And so you might say, well, why switch to feminine imagery for God only rather than something genderless? And Dr. Gaffney is very clear that this is a preliminary, kind of a preliminary step. You have to include the women before you can then go beyond gender, or you're skipping over the 2,000 years or more of exclusively male language for God. But there are many names that she just came up with a list there in the back of her book of ways that she might refer to God. Particularly, she does this in the Psalms. But we often might say Holy One or Holy God. We could say Gracious God, Ark of Safety, Ancient One, Ageless God, Exalted, Loving God, Majestic One, Mighty One, Most High. My personal favorite is Sovereign Commander of Winged Warriors. Because when we say the word heavenly host, we don't have really a conception of what that is. The heavenly hosts are the messengers of God. And so it's the sovereign commander of winged warriors. So I wonder if you might have images that you use when you pray for God. And I am certainly going to begin. I've been working on this some since using this lectionary, which has certainly challenged my understanding of the text. I'm going to expand my repertoire of names that I use for the God who is beyond all names. So that's what I did this weekend, and it was quite lovely to be away for a couple of days, to know that the congregation was in good hands, and to be with other women and with a scholar of such great skill and teaching ability to learn. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that. So, whatever name you pray to God with, I hope that you do pray. And we will be joining in prayer this evening for Compline at 7:30 and on Wednesday evening at 6:30 for evening prayer. And I will have more information or reflections for you on Thursday morning. Until then, my blessings are with you and those you love and pray for.